I'm not a member of the China threat school, which is not to say that China is not growing economically, it is. Not to say it's not getting stronger militarily, it is. But two things also strike me about China. Then I will talk about the one thing that bothers me. One is that interdependence is a reality. The Chinese need to export. The Chinese need to import. That argues for maintaining fairly stable relations in the region as well as with the United States. So I think there are certain constraints on China. They're not unlimited, but the constraints are meaningful. Second of all, when I look at China, look, I'm not a China expert, but when I look at China, I'm at least as struck by the challenges they face. And what an inbox. If you're Xi Jinping and his comrades, what an inbox. Now you look at the gap between the dynamism of the economy and the political system. You look at the corruption, which is profound. You look at the environmental challenges, which are extraordinary. You look at the number of sizable political protests, between 100,000 and 200,000 a year. You've got two competing political systems. You've got the formal Communist Party. You've got 500 million Chinese who are using the internet. You've got to move, you've got to rebalance your economy away from largely export-oriented to much more domestic consumption and demand-driven. Easier said than done. You've got to change the savings behavior and turn it more into spending behavior on the part of Chinese. You still have hundreds of millions of Chinese living in rural poverty who have to be moved out. Wow. That's a fairly, you got all the ethnic, linguistic, on top of it all, the basic realities, if you will, of modern China. I think navigating this, I talked before about the challenges to American diplomacy in Asia. I think the challenges to the Chinese leadership are profound to get this right and to deal with the domestic pressures. And the one thing that concerns me, particularly as economic growth slows, and the days, by the way, of double-digit growth are over, and that's the real problem. Double-digit growth gave China a kind of lubricant for the society. And that was kind of the bargain, if you will, of modern China. Grow at double digits, and we'll let you, if you will, we'll have top-heavy politics in exchange for ever-rising, significantly rising standards of living. Well, those days are over. The low-hanging fruit's been picked. The economy, it's not just slowed now. It is the next, you're not going to have the next 3 decades look like the last 3 decades in terms of Chinese economic growth. So the question is, how do you keep things calm in China? It's going to be tough. And the only thing that really worries me is the rise of nationalism in China. And I think that when you look at Asia, you look at the rise of nationalism in China and Japan and South Korea and so forth, the management of this is a real challenge. And I think that's what's slightly different about now as opposed to 2 or 3 years ago. And we've seen a more assertive Chinese foreign policy. We've now seen the Japanese and Korean reactions to it. And this is what, it's just something to keep, I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think it's significant. But no, the idea that, again, the people who've been beating the drums about China's rise and all that, sure, it's rising, but you also got to remember that, one last thing, the economy, you got this thing called the denominator. Every once in a while, I think people write about China's rise, cut class. They attended class the day where you learned about the top half of the fraction, but not the bottom half of the fraction. There's this thing, they miss denominators, or they're out smoking somewhere. There is a denominator of 1.3 billion, and that kind of reduces things significantly. And I didn't even talk about demographic issues in China, the unintended consequences of one child, the aging issues. Again, it's a long, long list. So I think the internal constraints are considerable, but there will be real diplomatic challenges. And there'll be real challenges for the Chinese leaders, because there will be Chinese leaders who will be tempted. It always happens, to somehow ride that nationalism horse when there's friction in the society, whether it's to come up with a new source of legitimacy or to distract or what have you. And that to me is something worth watching.